Hi, I'm Willow. They called it a family gift. The house I paid off, 6 years, every cent from my own pocket. Then one night, my dad leaned in and said, "You have 1 week to move out. No warning, no shame, just betrayal, cold and clean." They forged my signature, transferred the deed. And still, they called it love? I thought I was part of a family. Turns out I was just their wallet with a pulse. But what they didn't know? I had one thing left they couldn't steal, and when I used it, their little plan fell apart. Before we dive in, what time are you listening and where from? Drop a comment below. I read everyone. The call came at 4:52 p.m. on a Thursday. I was sketching a logo revision for a boutique bakery client, headphones in, coffee gone cold. My phone lit up with Mom across the screen. I stared at it for a beat. She rarely called, and when she did, it usually meant someone was sick or something had broken. I swiped to answer, bracing. "Willow," she said, her voice tight, almost rehearsed. "Can you come by tonight? Just a small family dinner? Around 7? That was odd. We hadn't had a family dinner in years, not since Alina's last meltdown. But something in her tone, it wasn't warm or casual, it was formal, like she was calling a tenant. Still, I closed my laptop, shoved it into my bag, and drove the 30 minutes to my childhood home. The neighborhood hadn't changed much. Same cracked sidewalks, same overgrown hedges 2 houses down. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed my dad's truck, Mom's Camry, and Alina's Lexus. Of course. When I stepped inside, the living room was too quiet. Then I heard laughter from the dining room. I paused in the hallway, smoothing my shirt like I was preparing for a job interview. I stepped in. Everyone was already seated. My place was set, but not between them like always. It was across the table, opposite an extra wine glass filled halfway with white. No one looked up at once, but they all smiled just a half-second too late, like actors waiting for a cue. "Hey, Willow," Dad said, raising his glass. "Glad you could make it. Sit, sit." I lowered myself into the seat. The cushion had been swapped, newer, firmer, a detail no one mentioned. Alina reached for the breadbasket like she hadn't spent the last 3 years dodging my calls unless she needed help moving or wiring money. She looked good, well-rested, hair freshly colored, the soft kind of tan that came from spa weekends, not labor. Dinner started with strained chatter. Alina mentioned a new Pilates instructor. Mom talked about her roses. Dad mostly chewed. Then, halfway through the baked chicken, he stood and lifted his wine. "To new beginnings," he said, "and a family." That was my first warning. He only made toasts when something was ending or starting without consent. "We've been talking," he continued, his eyes flicking to Mom, then Alina. "And we've made a decision. Your mother and I have decided to gift the house to Alina." I blinked. The fork in my hand didn't drop, but my brain did. She's had a tough year. With the divorce and all, she needs stability. Alina smiled demurely, like someone who just won a raffle she never entered. "Gift?" I asked slowly. "You mean sell?" "No," Mom said, dabbing her lips with a napkin. "A family gesture, a fresh start." "I've been paying the mortgage," I said, each word heavier than the last. "For 6 years." Dad leaned forward, eyes steady, like this was a business deal. "It's all settled. I already spoke to the lawyer. You'll have 1 week to vacate." The room blurred. My hands gripped the table's edge. I looked at Mom. She glanced away, reaching for the water pitcher like it was more pressing than her daughter losing her home. Alina didn't even flinch. "You can't be serious," I whispered. "This is my house." "No, it's our house," Dad corrected. "And we're giving it where it's needed most." I stood without pushing the chair back, walked out the sliding glass door into the backyard like muscle memory had taken over. The swing under the maple tree was still there, weathered, chains rusted, the wood split in places. I sat on it like I had when I was 10, knees tucked in. Mom used to say, "Good girls get to stay in the garden." Alina broke curfews, failed out of college twice, wrecked 2 cars. I stayed. I paid. I never asked for anything back. The wind rustled through the leaves, and I thought about all the birthdays I spent in this house. Alone. Alina always had some excuse, jet lag, cramps, the flu. But I still showed up for hers. Every year. I stared at the initials carved beneath the seat slat, K+D, mine and Dad's. They were half faded now. Like a promise someone forgot to keep. I didn't cry. I wanted to, but instead I stared up through the branches and asked myself a question I didn't want to hear the answer to. Was I ever family, or just the dependable one who filled the gaps? The porch light came on. It was getting dark. I stood, brushed off my jeans, and walked back in. Dad was waiting by the table. In front of him was a thick manila folder. "Sign this to make it official," he said, like it was nothing. "Just paperwork." I opened it, heart pounding. There, on the deed transfer, was my signature, my name, written by someone else. My breath caught, but not from surprise. It was the kind of stunned silence that settles when you realize something terrible has already been done, and the people who did it aren't even pretending to be sorry. I didn't sit. I didn't speak. I flipped through the manila folder, my fingers stiff, mechanical. The pages were neatly stacked, professionally formatted. My name appeared again and again, on every line that mattered. The signature? Flawless. Even the curl on the K matched the way I used to sign checks before switching to online banking. But I hadn't touched a pen in days. Then I saw it. The notary stamp. It looked official, crisp, embossed seal, a witness signature beneath it. I leaned closer, tracing the date. 2 weeks ago, I'd been in a hospital gown, hooked up to morphine, trying not to vomit after gallbladder surgery. 2 weeks ago, I couldn't even hold a spoon steady, let alone sign away my home. My throat tightened. I held the paper out slightly toward my father. "This is dated while I was under anesthesia." He didn't flinch. Well, it needed to be done. Behind him, Alina swirled her wine, smirking like we were discussing parking tickets. "You weren't in any shape to deal with forms," she said, voice sugary and condescending. "I helped. I mean, someone had to get it filed, right?" My eyes snapped to her. "You what?" She tilted her head, that same tilt she used as a kid when pretending to be innocent after breaking something expensive. "We just used the old documents you filled out when refinancing. The signature looked the same, and Dad said it was all legal." "You forged my name," I said, voice low, trembling. She sipped calmly. "Technically, I copied it." Dad held up a hand like he was diffusing some corporate meeting. "This wasn't malicious. Alina's been through a lot. Her ex drained her accounts, she's living off credit cards. This house is a foundation. You'll bounce back. You always do." There it was again. That backhanded compliment wrapped in guilt. "You always do." Like I was built for sacrifice. "This was a family decision," he added, pulling his glasses from his pocket and cleaning them like he couldn't bear to look at me. "We all agreed this was best." "All?" I repeated. My voice cracked on the word. I turned to my mother. She hadn't said a thing. She was still seated, fork in hand, eyes downcast. The same look she gave whenever Dad raised his voice in the past. The same passive silence she offered every time I asked why Alina got away with everything. "Did you agree too?" I asked. She blinked, then slowly folded her napkin and placed it on the table, never meeting my gaze. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. I nodded once just to stop myself from shaking, then turned and walked toward the stairs. The walls felt narrower than I remembered. The house was too quiet, too curated. All the warmth had been bled out, like someone had gutted the place while I wasn't looking. My old bedroom door creaked slightly as I pushed it open. The room was stripped bare. No framed sketches, no books, no throw blanket I'd left years ago when I moved out, but kept coming back on weekends to clean and paint. There was just a binder on the floor near the closet wall, blue plastic. I recognized it instantly. My mortgage receipts. I sat on the floor and flipped it open. Every payment was there. Auto drafts from my account, notes in my handwriting, timestamps, paper trails, 6 years. In the very back pocket, I found a sticky note I'd left myself. 1 more year, then it's mine for good. dated 4 years ago. My chest burned. I walked to the mirror above the dresser, still hanging crooked just like I'd left it. My reflection looked wrong. Older, paler. But it was my face, my eyes. "They stole my name," I said out loud, barely a whisper. "They stole my name, my home, and they're smiling like it's love." I didn't cry. My hands were shaking, but I didn't cry. Instead, I pulled out my phone, snapped a picture of the deed, then the receipts, then the sticky note. Every document that bore my handwriting, my money, my commitment. I didn't know what I'd do with them yet, but I wasn't letting this be rewritten without evidence. I stood slowly, gripping the edge of the dresser for balance. Outside the room, the hallway was dim. The house always had bad lighting upstairs, like it was trying to hide. I started down the hallway, toward the stairs, but paused outside Alina's old room. The door was cracked. She was on the phone, legs curled on the bed like she'd never left. Her voice was soft, almost giddy. "Yeah," she said, giggling. "It's done. She'll leave quietly. She always does." I stood there, unseen, listening, remembering every birthday I paid for, every rent she skipped, every time I drove to get her after a fight with some boyfriend. And now? I heard something shift inside me. It wasn't rage, it wasn't grief, it was colder, quieter. That was the moment something in me refused to leave quietly ever again. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the couch, fully dressed, blanket untouched, watching the ceiling fan spin as my thoughts raced. Sometime around 5 a.m., I gave up trying. I sat up, opened my laptop, and began organizing the pieces of what they'd done. Mortgage receipts, hospital bills, a cropped image of the notarized deed with my forged signature. I made a new folder on my desktop and named it one word: truth. Click. Saved. I sipped at lukewarm coffee as the sun filtered in through the blinds. The light should have felt comforting. It didn't. I was alone in my apartment, quiet, still, and it felt like the only honest space left in my life. I zoomed in on the notary stamp on the forged deed. Name, D.N. Coster, licensed, Texas, expires 2027. I pulled up the state's notary registry. It was real, registered under an address in a strip mall office outside San Marcos. I stared at the address for a long moment. Then I grabbed my keys and headed out the door. The drive was about 45 minutes. Every mile churned the knot tighter in my stomach. My hands clenched the wheel hard enough to cramp. I kept replaying Alina's voice from the night before. She always leaves quietly. That wasn't going to be true anymore. The strip mall looked like every forgettable commercial block in the state: nail salon, vape shop, donut place, and a tiny sign in faded letters that read, "Benton Legal Services and Notary." I walked in. The air inside was stale, humming with a cheap desk fan and the faint scent of reheated breakfast burritos. A young man sat behind a chipped particle board desk, typing something quickly, then looking up, startled when I stepped in. "Hi, ma'am. Can I help you?" He couldn't have been older than 22. Skinny, nervous eyes, shirt tucked in too tight. I handed him a copy of the notarized deed. "This stamp, D.N. Coster. That's here, right?" He squinted at the paper. His lips parted. "Oh, I watched the blood drain from his face. I mean, yeah, that's our notary stamp, but..." He flipped through a small binder next to his monitor and then turned back to me with a look of genuine discomfort. "Do you mind if I check something real quick?" He stood, disappeared behind a curtain, and I heard hushed voices. A minute later, he came back alone. He sat, opened a manila folder, and turned the monitor slightly toward me. "We log photo IDs with every notarized signature. That's protocol. If this was stamped here, we should have a copy." I leaned in as he clicked through the screen, and then he stopped. "See, here's the log for that date." There it was, my name. The date matched the forged deed. But the face? That wasn't me. It was a blurry photo, grainy and angled wrong, but enough to tell. Different earrings, different jacket. Hair was darker, pulled back tight. My stomach flipped. "That's not me," I whispered. Diego looked back and forth between me and the screen, clearly shaken. Yeah, I didn't think so. But I didn't want to accuse anyone, you know? I mean, people try weird stuff sometimes, but this? It's not good. He slid the folder across the desk, showing the intake form. The ID listed matched mine exactly. Number, expiration, address, all of it. How could she even have that? I muttered aloud, more to myself than him. Then the memory hit me like a hard jolt of cold water. 2 weeks ago, I was in the hospital bed, barely lucid from anesthesia. A nurse had helped adjust my IV, chatting softly about how lucky I was the surgery went well. Then I remembered the curtain pulling back, and my parents stepping in all smiles and flowers. "Look at you," my mother had said, brushing my hair back. "So brave. Just rest." And then she reached for my purse. "We'll keep your stuff safe, honey. Just sleep. You don't need to worry." I hadn't questioned it. I'd even thanked her, told her I loved her. Now I stood in a cheap legal office staring at a lie they orchestrated using my own name, my own ID, stolen from the hospital where I was trying to heal. My legs went weak. I gripped the edge of the desk. Diego stood halfway, concerned. "Ma'am, are you okay? Should I call someone?" I shook my head, swallowing down the rising tide inside me. No, I'm fine. Thank you." I gathered the printed screenshot he'd offered me, folded it carefully into my jacket pocket, and walked out into the morning sun that now felt too bright. They didn't just forge my name, they impersonated me, legally, casually, while I was sedated and vulnerable, and they smiled doing it. I got into my car, hands trembling, took a deep breath. Then I pulled out my phone. I opened a new text thread and typed, "Me. Let's meet. I have questions." The reply came back within seconds. "Alina. Sure, but just you. No drama." I stared at her message, my thumb hovering over the screen. No drama? If she wanted no drama, she shouldn't have turned my life into a lie. She didn't want drama? Then maybe she shouldn't have turned my life into a staged performance, with me as the fool and her as the leading lady. I arrived 10 minutes early, parked across from the cafe, and sat for a while in the car, watching people come and go. No makeup, no flashy coat, just my plain navy sweater and jeans, sleeves rolled to the elbow. I wanted her to see the version of me she didn't get to rewrite. Inside, the cafe smelled like cinnamon and burnt espresso. I picked a table facing the glass door, back against the wall, the way my therapist once taught me after everything with Trey. Pick the seat that lets you see who's coming. I'd barely opened the menu when Alina breezed in, sunlight catching her gold earrings. Her lips were painted bright red, too bright for a morning meeting, and her phone was glued to her hand like it was another limb. She walked straight over, no hesitation. "Wow," she said, setting her sunglasses on the table with a clatter. "You look tired. Still upset about the house stuff?" No, hi, no apology, just that syrupy tone she always used when she wanted me to feel small. I didn't answer right away, just nodded at the barista and ordered a black coffee. Alina waved for a soy matcha latte and smiled like we were just two sisters catching up after yoga. "You know," she said, swirling the straw in her drink after it came, "Mom and Dad, they thought I deserved something after everything I went through with Trey. You weren't around. They saw me struggle." I stared at her. "I was in the hospital." "I know," she replied quickly, too quickly. "But you know what I mean, emotionally. It's not about blame, it's just balance." She took another sip. "And anyway, I figured you'd be too busy with that design grant you applied for. The one in New York?" My hand froze halfway to my cup. "I never told you about that." She blinked. "You didn't?" I tilted my head. "No." Her eyes flickered. For a moment, the cracks showed. Then she shrugged and laughed, brushing invisible crumbs from her lap. "Well, you must have left your laptop open or something. You're always forgetting to log out." The table went quiet. A couple 2 seats over turned their heads briefly, then looked away. I stirred my coffee slowly, watching the cream swirl into dark clouds. "You read my emails while I was unconscious. I mean, it wasn't like that. Sure it was. Alina shifted, the fake calm on her face starting to fray. Look, I just wanted to know how to help. I was checking on bills and things. You weren't thinking clearly. I looked at her for a long moment, let her fill the silence with her own squirming. I've already spoken with a legal aid attorney, I said evenly. Forgery's a felony in Texas, same with identity theft. She blinked again. Her laugh this time was smaller, thinner. You wouldn't take it that far. Come on, Willow, it's family. I took one last sip of my coffee, stood up slowly, and gathered my bag. Try me. Her mouth opened, then closed. The glow she walked in with had dimmed to something chalky and hollow. I walked out without looking back. The sun had warmed the sidewalk by then. I crossed the street, cars humming past, and reached my car. Just as I opened the door, I heard her voice behind me, quiet but urgent. I thought we were supposed to share things. Isn't that what family means? I turned halfway, one hand on the frame. Then why didn't you ask? She didn't respond. I slid into the driver's seat, pulled the door closed, and started the engine. The tires crunched softly as I backed out of the space and pulled away from her reflection still standing on the sidewalk. Halfway home, my phone buzzed in the passenger seat. A message from Dad. We need to talk. Privately. I glanced at the screen, read it once, then again. If they wanted to talk, finally, I'd let them hear everything I had left to say. And I'd say it clearly, without raising my voice. That's how they'd know I meant every word. 2 days passed in silence. Then, late Saturday afternoon, a new message buzzed across my screen. It was short, almost casual. Dinner tonight at 6. Just family. Hope you can come. Dad. No mention of what we were really gathering for. No apology. Just an invite, like we were one big happy family again. My gut clenched, but I replied with a simple, I'll be there. By 5:45 I was pulling into the driveway I used to call home. I wore neutral tones, soft gray pants and a cream cardigan, hair tied back, no mascara, no armor, but no pretense either. I didn't come to charm them, I came to hear and be heard. The porch light flicked on as I stepped out of the car. Alina opened the front door before I even reached it. Her smile was wide, too wide. Willow, look at you, right on time. I didn't smile back. Inside, the house smelled like roast beef and rosemary. The dining table was dressed up with candles and cloth napkins, like something out of a Thanksgiving commercial. Someone had even hung up that wooden sign again, Family First. The irony stung more than usual. Mom stood at the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands on a towel. Glad you could make it, she said, voice tight but polite. We thought it was time to clear the air. I nodded once, then took the empty chair across from Alina. Aunt Marcy was already sipping red wine, murmuring something to Uncle Reed, who just grunted and kept his eyes on his plate. Everyone else followed the script. Smiles, nods, the occasional, pass the bread. But beneath the surface, I could feel it. The shift, the tension sitting right under the gravy boat. It didn't take long. Halfway through the salad, Dad cleared his throat and looked at me. You know, he began, setting his fork down. Your mother and we've been thinking about everything, about how this situation got so tangled. I waited. You've always been the strong one, Willow, independent. We figured you'd bounce back like you always do. Alina's eyes flicked toward me, but she stayed quiet. Dad continued. Alina, well, she's been through a lot with Trey. She needed a fresh start, a home of her own, and we thought... He paused. We thought you'd understand. I mean, you're not raising kids. You're not married. What do you need a whole house for anyway? The room went still. Even Aunt Marcy stopped mid-sip. I set my fork down carefully, wiped my hands with my napkin, and reached into my tote bag. Pulled out a single folded sheet of paper. I placed it in the center of the table, just beside the mashed potatoes. What's this? Mom asked. Notice of lis pendens, I said calmly. It means the house can't be sold, transferred, or refinanced until a court settles the ownership dispute. Dad blinked. You filed legal action? I filed notice, I said. Legal action's coming next. You'd take your own family to court? Mom whispered, like I'd pulled a weapon out of my purse instead of a legal document. No, I said. I'm just defending myself from people who decided I didn't count anymore. Alina let out a brittle laugh. This is insane. I looked at her steady. What's insane is someone stealing a deed and calling it helping, or reading private emails while their sister's in a hospital bed and calling it concern. You didn't ask. You took. Uncle Reed stood up. I think we should give them some space, he muttered to Marcy, who nodded and followed him to the living room without a word. For a few moments, nobody said anything. Even the clock on the wall sounded too loud. I stood up slowly. My eyes took in the room. The same dining chairs I reupholstered during my sabbatical, the crown molding I installed one summer after Mom said the walls looked bare. My tools were still in the garage. My sweat was in these walls, but none of it felt like mine anymore. I stepped away from the table, pulled my bag onto my shoulder and walked toward the front door. I was halfway down the driveway when I heard hurried footsteps behind me. Willow! It was Mom. If you go through with this, she said, her breath coming fast, you'll lose everything. You'll be cut off. No more family holidays, no support, nothing. I didn't turn around. I just said, then I guess I've got nothing left to lose, and kept walking. But I did have something left, a voice, and I was done silencing it for their comfort. I didn't sleep that Sunday night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the dinner replaying in my head on a loop. Every fork clink, every careful phrase, every calculated excuse. By dawn, I'd made up my mind. At 9:03 a.m. sharp, I stepped into the narrow hallway of the legal aid office downtown. The building looked like it hadn't been painted in 2 decades. The carpet was frayed at the edges, but I didn't come for appearances. I came for truth. Mr. Jansen will be right with you, the receptionist said, motioning me toward the row of creaky plastic chairs. I clutched the manila folder in my lap like it was a lifeline. Inside were the photocopies I pulled together after dinner, the modified deed, emails forwarded by a friend at the clerk's office, and the letter my father left half-shredded in his desk drawer. It wasn't much, but it was a start. When Mr. Jansen emerged, gray-haired, wire-rimmed glasses, cardigan with suede elbow patches, he gave me a kind but tired smile. Willow, he said, come in. Let's take a look. His office was small, with a mismatched desk and 2 chairs that squeaked when you shifted your weight. A chipped mug of tea sat on the corner of his desk, forgotten and cold. I laid the documents before him. For a few minutes, all I heard was the soft rustle of paper and the occasional clearing of his throat. I could feel my palms dampening. Finally, he tapped 1 page. This here, he said, adjusting his glasses, is dated March 18th. That week. Ring a bell? I frowned. That's when I was hospitalized. Pneumonia. I was out cold for at least 4 days. He nodded slowly. Right. Now, this clause, see here? This states that an emergency power of attorney was executed on your behalf. It allowed your sister, Alina, to act in your stead regarding financial and property matters. The words didn't register at first. What does that mean? Mr. Jansen turned the document toward me. It means that while you were unconscious, your parents signed paperwork granting Alina temporary authority, and she used it to transfer the deed to the house. My heart thudded once, then again, harder. I blinked, once, twice, trying to grasp the weight of what he'd just said. I knew they'd betrayed me. But this? That week was a blur in my memory. Machines beeping, nurses checking vitals, the sharp smell of antiseptic. And Alina. I remembered her sitting near the window, scrolling through her phone. A sudden memory surfaced, her brushing my hair back, murmuring softly, "Don't worry, Willow, we'll take care of everything." I had no idea she meant the house. They used my illness, I said, the words hollow, to steal what I built. Mr. Jansen leaned back in his chair. And left you with the hospital bill too, from what I gather. I let out a short, dry laugh. Of course they did. He tapped the edge of the folder again. But here's the thing. If we can prove this was done with intent, if they exploited your vulnerable condition knowingly, you don't just get the deed reversed. We're talking potential felony charges, conspiracy, fraud. I stared at him. Your parents and your sister could face legal consequences, he said simply. The words landed like stones in my chest. Outside, the street buzzed with the usual weekday rhythm, buses sighing to a stop, car horns in the distance, footsteps on pavement. I stood quietly on the curb outside the office, the manila folder pressed to my chest like a shield. If I pursued this, it wouldn't just be a court case. It would drag our entire family through the mud. Depositions, newsprint, whispers in church pews. My mother's brittle pride wouldn't survive it. My father, maybe he wouldn't care. And Alina? She'd cry. Then spin a new story. She always did. But if I did nothing, if I swallowed it down like they hoped, I knew exactly what would happen. They'd do it again. Maybe not to me. Maybe to someone else in the family who didn't fight back. A breeze picked up. I closed my eyes for a moment and just breathed. Across the street, a young woman, early 20s maybe, was standing stiffly on the sidewalk while another woman, older, dressed in tailored clothes and too much perfume, scolded her. I couldn't hear the words, but I recognized the tone, dismissive, controlling, familiar. The younger woman looked down at her shoes, said nothing. I'd done that for years. I turned away from the scene and pulled out my phone. My hand hovered over the keypad for a beat, then moved with purpose. The phone rang twice. Detective Rivas speaking. Hi, I said, voice steady. I need to report a case of fraud, family-based. It involves forged property transfer, power of attorney misuse, and I have documents to prove it. There was a pause. Then, I'm listening. Because silence was no longer a shield. It had become a weapon used against me. No, it wasn't over. Because her final move was still waiting in the dark. By Thursday, I found myself seated in a windowless room at the Community Arbitration Center. The walls were a bland gray, the kind that absorbs emotion rather than reflects it, and the air smelled faintly of copier ink and stale coffee. Across from me, a long table separated 4 chairs. 3 of them were already filled. Alina sat at the center, like a smug queen flanked by her loyal guards. Our parents. My mother wore a silk scarf and stiff posture, like she was attending a garden party. My father looked straight ahead, not meeting my eyes. And Alina? She gave me a smile that wasn't a smile, just enough curl at the corners to remind me she thought she was still in control. The mediator, Ms. Harmon, greeted us with a voice that was far too warm for what this really was. Good morning. I trust everyone received the session materials? She waited for polite nods. Mine was tight, silent. This session is non-binding, she continued, but everything said here is on record. We're here to facilitate clarity, resolution if possible. Clarity? I could offer that. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small black thumb drive. I'd like to share something before we begin. Ms. Harmon looked surprised, but motioned to the laptop in the corner of the room. I walked over, plugged it in, and opened the file titled, simply, Room 204 Footage. The screen came to life. Grainy security video, a timestamp from the week I was hospitalized. There she was, Alina, walking into my hospital room in full makeup and heels. Behind her, a man in a brown blazer carrying a leather folder and a notary seal. My body was visible in the frame, unmoving, face turned to the window. Tubes in my arms, eyes shut. The notary leaned over. Alina pointed to something on the clipboard. They positioned my hand. My hand. I don't know how long we watched in silence. Maybe 2 minutes, maybe 10. No one said a word. Not even my father shifted in his seat. Finally, Ms. Harmon spoke, her voice more careful now. Did she have legal consent to act on your behalf at that time? I answered without hesitation. Only forged documents. My mother made a small sound in her throat, like she was about to speak, but didn't. Ms. Harmon pressed her lips together. This changes things. Considerably. I turned to face them again. I wasn't just lied to, I was used, while I was unconscious in a hospital bed. That's when my mother's composure cracked, not loudly, but with a quiet snap, like the seam of something long worn thin. "You were never going to take care of that house," she said, eyes narrowing. "You never brought anyone over, never talked about starting a family. You sit in your little studio sketching dreams on paper and act like that's enough. Real life is bigger than that." Alina's mouth twitched, but she said nothing. She didn't need to. Mom was saying it all. "So you punished me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. "For being independent?" "We had to protect what's ours," my mother said, "from your detachment, your choices." I leaned forward. "It wasn't yours. It never was. Not by deed, not by design, and certainly not by any version of love I'd recognize." No one interrupted me this time. My heart pounded, but my hands were steady. I reached into my purse again, this time for something older, folded so many times it felt soft at the creases. I laid it on the table. It was the napkin sketch I'd drawn of the house, the one I showed my father 7 years ago. Lines faded but still clear, wraparound porch, studio window facing east, tiny fig tree in the front yard. "You watched me build it," I said, looking at my father now. "Every inch. You stood next to me when we broke ground. You brought over lemonade when I stayed up painting the walls. And you still let them take it." He looked away. My mother's eyes fell on the sketch, and for the first time, something passed through her expression that looked vaguely like guilt, or maybe just recognition. I didn't press it. I didn't need her confession, because the evidence was right there. Ms. Harmon cleared her throat. "Based on this footage and the nature of the documents, I'm obligated to halt this session. This needs legal review, possibly criminal." I gathered the napkin sketch, folded it gently, and tucked it back into my purse. As I stood, Alina reached out suddenly and grabbed my arm. "You think this is over?" she hissed, low enough so only I could hear. "It's not." I met her gaze without flinching. "No," I said softly. "It's not. But the next move won't be yours." Because her final move was still waiting in the dark. I didn't respond to Alina's hissed warning in the hallway, just pulled my arm free and walked out of the center, my heels echoing down the polished tile floor like punctuation marks. By the time I stepped outside into the humid midday air, I already knew her next move was coming, and it would be desperate. That was Friday. By Monday morning, I stood at the entrance of the county courthouse. I'd worn navy, not black, not gray, strong, but not harsh. A silent reminder that I wasn't here to grieve. I was here to reclaim. The hearing room was already half full when I arrived. Rows of folding chairs packed with legal aides, a few local reporters, and 1 or 2 curious neighbors. My name had started circulating ever since the arbitration footage was leaked. People wanted a show, and they were about to get one. Alina walked in 5 minutes later, dressed in a muted blue dress with a brooch shaped like a dove. She looked like someone attending a memorial for a beloved teacher. Behind her, our parents followed, father nodding to the clerk, mother holding her clutch like it was armor. Judge Halber entered next. Older man, stern face. He didn't waste time. "Court is now in session. This hearing pertains to the contested transfer of property located at 1836 North Alder Avenue. Parties are present. We'll begin with the petitioner." Alina's attorney stood. His tone was calm, composed, and utterly false. My client acted not out of malice, but concern. Ms. Murchison, Willow, was in a medically vulnerable state at the time of transfer. There were indications she was not of sound mind. We have submitted documentation to support this. I frowned, barely breathing. Then he slid a manila folder across the table. The judge opened it, his brow arched. "This is a psychiatric evaluation?" he asked, flipping pages. I leaned forward, my eyes catching my name, typed at the top of a page stamped with a clinic seal. It claimed I'd been diagnosed with dissociative disorder, that I had hallucinations, that I was unfit to manage assets. I stared at it. My hands didn't shake, but inside, something turned cold. "That document is a lie," I said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "And I can prove it." The judge looked up sharply. "Go on." I reached into my file and pulled out a signed affidavit from my licensed therapist, dated just a week prior. I handed it to the bailiff, who passed it forward. "In that envelope," I added, "you'll also find printouts of email logs showing an impersonation attempt. Someone using an address in my name requested a mental evaluation on my behalf, without my knowledge. The IP address leads directly back to my sister's personal laptop. I have digital forensics to verify it." Gasps rippled through the room. My mother visibly stiffened. My father closed his eyes. Alina didn't blink. Her eyes stayed locked on the table. Judge Halber took his time. He read the statement from my therapist, compared it line by line with the supposed report, then turned toward the back of the courtroom. "Detective Rivas?" The officer in plain clothes who had been seated quietly stood. "We verified Ms. Murchison's claims. The IP match is consistent. The false report was never filed through the proper mental health channels. We believe it was generated privately, likely using stolen templates." The silence that followed was heavy, humbling, and, for the first time in weeks, safe. Judge Halber turned back to the courtroom. "I hereby declare the property transfer of 1836 North Alder Avenue to be void on the grounds of willful fraud and identity misrepresentation. Ownership is reinstated in Ms. Willow Murchison's name." He paused before adding, "A separate inquiry will be opened regarding the conduct of Ms. Alina Murchison, and Mr. and Mrs. Murchison Senior Court is adjourned." The gavel hit once. That was it. I exhaled, long and quiet. I didn't smile. Not yet. The hall outside the courtroom buzzed with murmurs and footsteps. Reporters huddled near the exit, too cautious to approach yet. I kept walking. Then I saw something that stopped me in my tracks. Near the exit, a janitor was folding cloth napkins for the building's small cafe. Each fold was deliberate, and for a second I saw it. He'd folded one into the same shape I had drawn years ago when sketching design patterns. A curled leaf, symmetrical and simple. It reminded me of the napkin I'd sketched my dream house on, the one they tried to erase. I watched him fold in silence for a moment, then nodded almost to myself. Some things come back, not to haunt, but to remind. I stepped out into the sunlight. The breeze lifted my hair slightly. It should have felt like a victory, but I wasn't sure what this was yet. Relief? Maybe. Closure? Not fully. "Willow!" Alina's voice cut through the air. I turned. She was storming toward me, in heels she couldn't quite walk in. "You ruined everything," she spat. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "No," I said, "you did. When you decided family meant control instead of love." Our parents stood behind her but said nothing. My mother looked away. My father's gaze dropped to the floor, as if counting the tiles might erase the past. I walked away, step by step, out of the courthouse, down the front steps, into the parking lot. That's when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. "Ms. Murchison?" a woman's voice said. "This is First Century Trust Bank. We noticed some unusual attempts to access your fund this morning. Are you currently authorizing any third-party access?" I stopped mid-step. "No," I replied. "I'm not." The line went silent for a moment. Then, "Understood. We'll place a temporary freeze and escalate internally. You may want to check your legal counsel. This came from someone using familial credentials." I ended the call. My hands clenched around the steering wheel as I sat inside the car. My house was safe now, but that didn't mean the war was over. I thought it was, but greed doesn't end when the courtroom empties. That Monday, I placed a call to my bank manager and instructed them to flag every single access request. I stayed up through the week, reviewing old documents, changing passwords, double-checking locks, physical and digital. Trust was no longer something I handed out casually. But by the following Friday evening, something inside me began to loosen. I was home. The garden out front looked nothing like it did when I first left. Weeds had crept in, The roses were scorched from neglect, and the tiny solar lights lining the path had long stopped working. Still, it was mine again. The deed had my name on it, no asterisks, no court stamps, just me. I knelt by the hydrangeas, trimmed back the deadheads, and watered the roots slowly, like I was tending something deeper. As the hose hissed behind me, my phone buzzed from the porch rail. A voicemail. I dried my hands on my jeans and played it on speaker. My mother's voice came through, tight, brittle. "We never wanted things to go this far," she said, like it had all just happened. "Your sister's just lost. Can't you forgive?" There was a long pause. You could almost hear her wanting to sound like a mother, but unable to remember how. I didn't listen twice. I pressed delete. Some silences are earned. Later that afternoon, just as the sun had begun sliding low behind the maple tree, a familiar black SUV pulled up at the curb. Detective Rivas stepped out, coat slung over one arm, clipboard in the other. He didn't bother with formalities, just nodded toward the porch. "May I?" he asked. I gestured to the second rocking chair. "You already know where everything is." He sat. "Wanted to give you a quick update," he said. "Digital forensics came back. Everything you said checked out. Alina's prints are all over the impersonation request, the fake documents, even the bank attempt. She's not hiding her trail well." "What about my parents?" I asked, not bitter, just clear. "They may not go down criminally, but civil charges are another story. Financial coercion, elder manipulation since they used your grandfather's name to justify things, and you've got documentation backing it all." I nodded. Rivas stood after a moment, adjusting his collar. "You did good, Willow," he said. "Most people would have folded." "I almost did," I admitted, but then I remembered. My worth doesn't hinge on whether they understand it. He smiled. "You're gonna be fine." After he left, I sat still for a while, listening to the rustle of wind through the porch screen. The next morning, I had a meeting with my financial advisor. Quiet little office near the edge of town, not far from the old farmer's market. When I walked in, she already had a folder open. "There's something you should see," she said, and slid it across the desk. Inside was a copy of my trust documents, but this one had a handwritten addendum. It was dated almost 20 years ago. Apparently, my grandfather, quiet man, always 2 steps ahead, had included a safeguard clause, one that triggered a freeze if suspicious attempts were made to withdraw or redirect the trust during my lifetime, especially if I wasn't the one initiating them. "Turns out," she said gently, "he knew how your parents operated. Quiet wisdom, written in ink." I sat back, the weight of relief almost foreign. They hadn't touched it. Not a cent. When I got home that afternoon, I opened one of the old moving boxes I hadn't bothered to unpack yet, mostly junk from the attic, odds and ends from the years before everything fell apart. An old notebook sat on top, spine barely holding. I flipped through. Tucked between the pages, crumpled and thin, was a napkin. Faded, yellowing, soft with age. I knew what it was the second I saw it, my first folded leaf design. The one I made before I even knew what I wanted in life, before the house, before the betrayal, before I had to prove anything to anyone. I smoothed it gently on the table. Its lines were crooked, the edges torn, but it was still here. "They took almost everything," I whispered, "but not who I am." Just before sundown, as I finished placing clean sheets in the upstairs bedroom, I heard a soft knock on the front door. I walked down and opened it to find Mrs. Howell, my neighbor from 3 houses down, standing with a small tin in her hands. "Well," she said with a warm smile, "I figured the first weekend back in your house deserved something sweet." I laughed quietly. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," she said, pressing the tin into my hands. "But you've always been the kind one, always waving, always asking about people's dogs. The house feels right again, with you in it." My throat tightened, and for a second I didn't speak. Not from sadness, just being seen. We chatted for a few minutes. She asked if the birds had come back to the feeders out back. I promised I'd refill them. After she left, I sat on the porch, legs tucked under me, cookies still warm beside my tea. The house behind me wasn't buzzing, it wasn't filled with people, but it was mine. It was mine in the quiet, mine in the healing, mine in the strength it took to win it back. My heart still had bruises, but it beat in a rhythm I recognized again. Family should be where you're safe, I whispered to the air, and if not, then we build it from scratch, from truth. The sun dipped low, casting the porch in a soft orange glow. Wind stirred the trees gently, as if offering its own kind of blessing. Have you ever been betrayed by the people closest to you and had to rebuild from nothing? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. Sometimes silence is justice, and sometimes standing up is the only way to be free.